Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sharon Lockyer and I'm the Director of the Centre for Comedy Studies Research based here at Brunel University London. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to Funny, Honest and Just Like Us, the political co-option of satire. On behalf of Brunel University, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome, particularly to those of you who've travelled quite a long way to be here today, so thank you for coming. This event today sort of links to a research seminar series that the Centre for Comedy Studies Research and the Magna Carta Institute has been running this year, looking at the relationship between comedy and politics. And this has been funded by Brunel University, and they're funding this event today as well. And today's session provides a unique opportunity to discuss and explore quite the dynamic and the complex relationship between politics and comedy through the insights provided by Dr. Rebecca Higgins' research. And Rebecca has been a postdoctoral research fellow here at the Centre for Comedy Studies Research for almost 6 months. This is her last full week. And Christelle's research is funded by the Australian government's Endeavour programme, and she's been conducting a 6-month study looking at how voters evaluate politicians who participate in political comedy satirical programmes. And Rebecca's received her PhD from Curtin University in Western Australia in 2014. And her passion really lies in the study of texts that engage with politics in unconventional and mischievous ways. And as I said, Rebecca's been here for nearly 6 months conducting research at the centre, and I was delighted when Rebecca offered to give a presentation, bringing her 6 months together and to share her thoughts and her findings with you. So Rebecca would talk for about 40-ish minutes, and then there'd be time for discussion, questions and answers, and then there's wine and soft drinks, so you can have time for sort of networking and relaxing time at the end as well. Okay, so over to you, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you, and thank you all for coming today. I will also mention, as Sharon gave you a great introduction, this project was kind of funded by the Australian government. It's called the Endeavour program, and it's very much a very short 6-month project. The project was basically to just do a survey of, to see people's attitudes towards politicians who go on comedy programs. While I was here, I did a little bit more than that. I explored a lot of different things. This is basically the questions that my research kind of addressed. So like, what function does satire serve in modern democracy? How do voters respond to politicians who have a sense of humour? What happens to satire when it is celebrated or used by the very people that it satirises? And how does satirical hijacking in social media impact the public images of political parties? The two main concerns basically with all of this and with all my research is satire's function within politics and satire's contribution to politicians' public personas. While I've been here, I've written up 3 publications that I basically, this seminar was designed as this is the research I've done, these are my findings. Today, I'm afraid I won't have time. I don't think I'll have time to go over my research with Twitter, which looked at the hijacking of UKIP's hashtag why I'm voting UKIP during the European elections. But if you're interested, I do have a copy of the paper here if you want to have a look. And maybe at the end, if we have time, we can go over it. Otherwise, today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the survey that I did and the results from that. And then I'm going to talk about a book chapter that kind of really feeds into that, and it's about the theory of co-option. It feeds in quite nicely. So let's start with the survey. So first of all, the survey was, I'll just tell you a little bit about the design. The first part, I kind of split it into 2 parts. The first part, everyone filled in. So I had 489 people fill in this part of the survey, where I asked people about their consumption of satire, what they were watching. I asked them what they thought satire's function was. And also I asked them about their general thoughts on politicians' motives. In the second part, this was optional. People could fill it in if they felt like they had the time. Everyone watched a clip of President Obama on the Colbert Report, which I've got a picture up there. This video, I chose all the videos very carefully. The first one Obama actually appears in a scripted skit. He pretends he takes over the show, so he's going to be Stephen Colbert, he's going to be the satirist. He delivers the words as if he is the satirist. And there is no intrusion from Colbert in this skit, which is really, really interesting. For me, the politician is self-satirising and the satirist is not there. The two other videos, there was an option. So because this project's funded by the Australian government, have to have an Australian element in there, but also because these three countries, the US, the UK and Australia, politicians have increasingly been going in these countries onto these programs. If people filled in the one on Clegg, this was when Nick Clegg went on the last leg and was interviewed by Alex Brooker. In this kind of interview, Brooker was quite combative, he was quite harsh. He had a buzzer that he would push that would yell bullshit whenever he felt that Clegg was talking bullshit. It was reported a lot in the media. On Twitter it became the third highest trending hashtag in the world after it happened. So it got a lot of media attention. And that was because Clegg said things like, yes, I did want to slap David Cameron when I was in coalition with him. When he was asked if Boris Johnson was more statesman or twat, he answered twat. And when he was asked about his feelings on tuition freeze, how much he regretted it, he gave a 9.5 out of 10. So you can see why this got a lot of attention. Also what's notable about this one, and I'll talk about this later, is he talked a lot about voting. So he went on the program under the premise of trying to convince the comedian to vote. He even used an analogy he talked about Nando's, because the comedian famously loves Nando's, saying it's like going to Nando's and getting someone to put in an order for you, without actually doing the order yourself. That way you're going to get something you don't want. So if you don't vote, you're going to get a government you don't want. And that was something that was reported on a lot in the media too. The final example for Australia, this is Maxine McHugh, a Labor politician back home. She was also an ABC journalist. She went on a show called Yes We Canberra. Yes We Can, you can see the nice pun there. From a very famous satirical team called The Chaser. They have a reputation for ambushing people, and they've gained so much cultural capital that now politicians will go on their programs very willingly. And in this instance, she was hooked up to a fake polygraph machine, where the satirists it's functioned much like the bullshit buzzer. Whenever she said something, they would flag it as, well, she's a liar, so it kind of worked. These two videos worked in a similar way. Again, the satirists here are interacting a lot with the politicians. It's not scripted, so they don't have as much control as Obama, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Very quickly, like I said, I had 489 participants who all filled in part one. I had 260 who watched the Obama video and responded to it, 138 for Clegg and 84 for McHugh. I have to say, this is not a representative survey. It was an open survey. So obviously this is not, these demographics are not representative. But the amount of participants I got means I got a really nice chunk of data that can hopefully lead to more representative research. Participants were mainly young, highly educated and left-wing, so 47.4% were aged between 18 and 35. I got about 60% women, so quite a lot of women filled in this survey, yeah. Considering satire is a male-dominated industry, that's quite interesting. The university educators, so 75.3%, that's quite huge. They were evenly spread across bachelor, master's and doctorate. And again, you can see, you know who filled in this survey. 40% students, 33.9% from the education sector. Most of them were from the UK, followed by Australia and the US, and then I asked people residency and citizenship because I know that there are a lot of people who live in different parts of the world from their own citizenship, and they also consume satire from places that are not either where they're living or where they're from. Political persuasion, 48.9% left-wing, 30.1% moderate centre, and 6.9% right-wing. So you can see I didn't get a lot of... unfortunately, I couldn't talk a lot about political persuasion and its impact on the responses. But that wasn't the focus of this research. But let's move on to the fun stuff. So in the first part, the most important thing that I asked them was, what function, if any, does satire and political comedy serve? And here, all of these responses here is all about, I wanted to see if audiences agree with the thing that scholars have been saying for ages, which is that satire serves a critical function in our democracy. So I had things like, it's a way for viewers to laugh at politics, a way for viewers to engage with politics, to learn about politics, a way of mocking the powerful, and of course entertainment. And as you can see with the memes, a lot of people really, really strongly agreed with this. And I expected, if people agree that satire serves a critical function, it can help us learn about politics, it mocks the powerful, then they wouldn't be too pleased with politicians getting involved. Then I asked if it's an opportunity for politicians to reach different audiences or to present themselves as good-humoured. And as you can see from the meme, most people agree. Like, there was a majority of people that believed. The deviation between responses between people who agreed, neither agreed or disagreed did go up. And for this one here, an opportunity for politicians to present political messages or policy, then again we have, there's less people agreeing with that. But I found this quite interesting, that people were saying, yes, I do agree that yes, it's an opportunity for the function it kind of serves in this way. When I then actually went on to look at the open-ended responses, I came up with an explanation. Namely that the people who said they agreed that satire kind of works as a communication tool for politicians didn't necessarily like it. So what they were doing was answering how they felt satire was currently functioning, not how necessarily it should function. And that's something I'm going to discuss later on. And I would have to say, I'd love extra research to be done on this, the way that people actually feel towards satire, and the currency that it has. So looking at Obama, what I did with each video was I asked people to talk about the politician's image, the image they were trying to portray, the message they were trying to bring across, whether they were successful, and what the politician's motive was. I also asked them to respond again on to do with the politician's traits. For Obama, a lot of people talked about the idea that he was this kind of good-natured, relatable statesman with a very important message about healthcare. In the video, he talks a lot about healthcare, trying to advocate that young people should sign up. He was wildly successful. 86.2% said yes, he was successful in how he wanted to present himself and the message he wanted to get across. It was only 1.9% no, and 11.9% said don't know. This is also, when we look at the table here about his traits, he came across extremely well. He scored highly in everything except foolish and elitist. One interesting thing is to note, though, that fewer people with honest and genuine, the mean goes down. So being good-natured, overwhelmingly good-natured and overwhelmingly able to take a joke doesn't always translate to being genuine and honest. There was some... people would sometimes question the sincerity of the performance. One of the reason why I think he was successful is obviously he's a very skilled performer, he's a very skilled communicator. But the format of the skit, the humour he used, and the role of the satirist was also very crucial. And this came out in the responses I got, the open-ended responses I got from people. First of all, obviously, it's a scripted skit without any intrusion from Colbert. He had complete control over it before he even set on stage. And the fact that he was speaking Colbert's words, a lot of participants commented on this, saying that he was being the satirist in that moment. He was able to deliver criticism onto himself, but also rebuff that by being the satirist. A lot of people said Colbert is popular, left-wing, sympathetic, safe. But a lot of people also commented on the fact that it was respected, it had cultural currency. They felt that Obama recognised that it was, in the words of one participant, respected for telling the truth and informing people. The humour Obama used was, a lot of people commented, they used the word, it wasn't buffoonish, it wasn't clownish. So he used dry humour, wry humour, he was witty, he was deadpan. So the humour he used was very dignified. And this was the most interesting finding for me, was that he came across as statesman-like, yet unlike other politicians. And here, there seemed to be a dichotomy between statesman and politician. So, in a way, he was a statesman, but he wasn't a politician. A politician was was viewed as having, there was complete cynicism towards politicians. But one could kind of be within the discourse of politics and not face the cynicism that is directed towards politicians if one could very carefully combine dignity and humour. So I would say one of the most interesting things, and I do draw it out hopefully better in my article, but that he could be a statesman but not a politician, and this was not something that was repeated in Clegg or McHugh. Moving on to poor Clegg. He didn't fare as well, though he did do better than I expected. The same kind of narrative started appearing. People started saying, well, he tried to present himself as good-humoured, ordinary, outside the political system, yet operating within it. Again, the anti-politician kind of rhetoric comes out, but no one used the word statesman. The word statesman was thrown around so much for Obama, no one person used it for Clegg. A lot of people talked about him trying to present himself as an alternative to the Conservatives, that when he was in coalition with them, he was trying to rein in Tory extremism. His message was all about, a lot of people talked about his message being about voting. And some people thought, well, he's trying to talk about the importance of the democratic process, and some people saw that as being purely self-interested, that he was basically saying, vote for me. When it came to whether or not he was successful in presenting all of these things, 51.4% said no, 27.5% said yes, and 21% said don't know. When I asked people to say how he came across in his traits, you can see it's a very different kind of chart to Obama. What was interesting though is that most people did, there's quite a lot of people that agreed that yes, he came across as good-natured and able to take a joke. He didn't do so well with honest and genuine, he didn't do so well with funny and foolish, but he did, people could at least say that yes, he came across as good-natured. And this was, again, came out a lot in the open-ended responses. So people, first of all, they said that Brooker was a lot of people said he was harsh. Some people, US people who identified as coming from the US said that he was much harsher than any US comedian they'd ever seen. And some people felt like he'd been tricked. So he'd been tricked on the program. He went on there under the proviso that he was going to talk about voting, and Brooker didn't let him speak about voting until the very end. Some people expressed a lot of sympathy for him. Granted, there are a lot of people who didn't. But even those people who didn't have any sympathy for him whatsoever still could say, well, he was at least taking it in, he was at least being relatively good-humoured. The last leg was often talked about as being, they thought Clegg wanted to go on the program to appeal to younger voters, to people who are not as engaged with political media, and they talked about the last leg as being like a non-bollocks medium, as something for cynical people who like to think of themselves as being critical and engaged. The thing about Brooker being so harsh, and the fact that he was going on this critical medium, there was one participant who said this, and this is, I really like this. They said, the last leg is presented as a down-to-earth show, Brooker's questioning style, etc. For cynical and quite well-informed people, compared with other mainstream shows, Clegg is trying to appear to reveal more about himself, to show that he is cynical about the state of politics and the people in Westminster. Brooker appears to attack him, but does ultimately facilitate this. This participant was the only person who made this comment. Most people said Brooker was really harsh. Sometimes he was unfair, sometimes he was harsh in a good way, other times, as I said, he was too combative. He didn't let Clegg present a message at all. He made Clegg jump around. And I feel like the fact that he still came across relatively good-humoured, he may have been unsuccessful, he may have lacked a clear, coherent message, but he still came across relatively well. The fact, I think, that so few participants made a comment like this kind of suggests that audiences may automatically assume that if a satirist is outwardly hostile, outwardly combative, that the politician is being held to account. And I think that's something interesting to consider. Moving on to McHugh from Australia. Again, similar narratives appear. Participants said, yes, she wanted to come across as good-humoured, relatable, reliable politician. But her humour was cast as much more gentle. The words you used were gentle, friendly, nice, modest. And even one participant said, she's trying to be like Obama, but more gentle. So it started to get quite gendered, the way that they were talking about her. And they also talked about being Australian. So this was what I found interesting was this didn't come up in anything to do with Obama, and there was nothing to do with the UK with Clegg. The participants that responded to this talked about the importance of being laid back, not taking yourself too seriously, kind of being like an Aussie bloke, and the importance of like the masculine kind of, no, and this is important, sadly, for the fact that she's a woman. She needs to appeal to a kind of, a mythical Australian figure that is almost always a man, and that is that kind of laid-back, ochre bloke. And that's the way that men also try to perform when they go on The Chaser as well. They try to be that laid-back Aussie bloke. So a lot of participants identified that it was important for her to come across as that stereotypical Australian. When it came to message, she was the only politician that no one could identify any message with. Her message was her personal image. One participant said, she tried to mention that the Citizens' Assembly was a good idea, but that participant went on to say, but broadly, it was about her personal image. When it came to whether or not she was successful in presenting herself in this way, 48.3% said yes, 19% said no, 22.6% said don't know. She also came across quite well in the table here with all the traits. Again, you can see honest and genuine dips, but here, good-natured especially, no one disagreed that she came across as good-natured or able to take a joke, so she did extremely well. I kind of did a comparison between all the means, and I found that there was a significant difference between all of the politicians except Obama and McHugh. So Obama and McHugh, there wasn't a significant difference between them when it came to being good-natured, able to take a joke, genuine and elitist. And that's interesting in itself because they're very different performances. And the reason for you might say, well, Obama had complete control, really. He didn't have any intrusion from the satirist. In this instance, they hooked her up to a fake polygraph machine. But there was very different dynamic. The satirists were not openly hostile, and at some point, the machine started to agree with her. So there's a point in the skit where the satirist makes a comment to her that's it's quite cruel, and she says, "Oh, that is really unkind," and the machine starts flashing true. And then it's really interesting, the satirist kind of backs away, looks embarrassed, and then apologises. So the dynamic is extremely different. Interestingly, no participants commented on the fact that the prop was used to call her a liar. The few times they mentioned it was a specific instance in the skit where the satirists ask her, "Do Labor politicians ever lie?" And she kind of looks, she does this fake surprise, and she says, the very thought, I don't know how you could suggest such a thing. The machine doesn't respond, and the satirists say, "Well, you're very clever, the machine didn't respond." The participants that commented on this said that they felt like she was being ironic. She's saying, "You know what, I admit, some politicians lie, but you know what, you can trust me, I'm honest, I'm genuine, you can rely, you can trust me." The fact that she was also a former journalist, on this show you can see the logo here, Lateline. This is a news show back in Australia that's quite well respected. She used to be the journalist, the host of this, and some participant commented on the fact that in a way she was back on her old show. She was back with her people. She could make a better relationship with the audience and with the satirist because she was back on her show. And a lot of other people also commented on the fact that the satirists themselves were identified as being kind of figures of Australianness that could help her appeal to certain audiences that she might want to appeal to. Overall, the survey basically found that there were various factors that kind of influenced whether or not a politician was successful. These came to things like the format of the show, the humour that the politician used. Like there are so many factors that obviously we take into account, but I think a lot of people who study this need to think a little bit more about, again, the humour that's used, the status of the satirists, whether or not we respect the satirists, and how that might influence how we feel about the politicians. Given the complexity over the kind of the role of the satirist, that whether or not they're a facilitator or a combative, and even if they are hostile, whether or not a politician can come across better if they're able to take that criticism, is something I think that really requires more research. I've basically... one thing... Sorry, I missed this bit. I didn't ask this directly, but I did ask participants to basically offer final comments on this particular phenomenon. And throughout the survey and in the final comment section, almost everyone who watched the videos commented on whether or not they felt it was positive or a negative phenomenon. For those who said it was positive, they said it offers political information from a different perspective, often a more relatable perspective. Politicians come across more relatable and separate from the political establishment. It's better, you can get a relationship with those who you're voting for. And for those, they said that they felt like the politician could earn more respect from them if they were able to play along in a critical environment. Like, so some people spoke very highly of satire, that satire is a critical environment, there's going to be more debate on it. So if a politician can exist in that environment and take that debate or take that criticism, then even if you don't necessarily agree, and a few participants said, I may not change my mind, basically, I may not change my political views, but I have grudgingly got more respect for that politician. There are some quotes here. I like to watch politicians who put themselves in a position where they either send themselves up or participate in being sent up. It sets them aside from those who have their head up where the sun don't shine. So, anti-politician narrative here. I admire them and feel a closer bond to those that are willing to be made fun of or share a joke than those who refuse. I think they are more honest in general because of it, whether it is true or not. So the participant here has actively said, I don't know if they're actually being more honest, but I think they're more honest, For those who felt it was negative, some felt when a politician does this, they compromise the dignity of politics, they simplify politics, and it makes it difficult to separate personality from policy, because often personality is privileged in these kind of environments. More often than not, though, it was all about the idea that the politician participating compromises the critical function of satire. So we had statements like, it is no longer satire when a politician is in the driving seat. You can think about Obama literally in the driving seat there with no intrusion from Colbert. And this one here, I think the two, politics and satire, work best when they are separate entities. Satire exists to punch upwards and to comment on those in positions of power in a humorous manner. It doesn't really work the same when those in power are complicit. It becomes more propaganda, even if they are held somewhat to account. And these were very similar, these were the kind of narratives that kept being repeated. Overall, given these kind of responses and the really interesting way in which, even when a satirist was openly combative, if the politician could perform well against that, they came across quite well. I kind of argue that satire is a practice that can endorse as it criticises and create sympathy as it ridicules. Not always, obviously, but I think in a lot of cases it's much more complex than just criticising and offering critique. It works in different ways. In the book chapter I wrote about co-option and the theory behind it. So I started to talk about the idea that satire has become kind of incorporated into dominant political discourse in a way. I used Raymond Williams' idea about incorporation, and basically the idea that the dominant kind of incorporates and at times even produces the counter-dominant. So he argues that there are residual elements. So in the kind of dominant discourse, and I know when we talk about dominant discourse, hegemony, everything, it's often talked about as one big block. I don't mean it that way, and that's the whole idea behind this, that it's the oppositional elements exist within mainstream and dominant elements. So it's like the rural community, for instance, it's often presented as being kind of like the alternative to urban capitalism, but it has been turned into a product, the idealised fantasy, a leisure function for us to consume. We then have emergent elements that were probably once very oppositional but are now incorporated as either soon to be established or accepted parts of the dominant. And the example that Williams uses is the popular press. When it comes to satire, I would argue that satire is actually an emergent element. It's at least popular satire, so I'm talking about like television satire. It's become oppositional yet incorporated feature of dominant political media. So it has its oppositional elements. Often it's very anti-capitalist, and sometimes, though I would flag this is not for most popular satire on television, it can sometimes be very anti-democratic. You've then got elements that appear alternative or oppositional, but actually reflect dominant mainstream narratives about politics. And this is the standard ones: politicians are corrupt, journalists are biased. Then you have very mainstream elements like satire's status as a commercial product, and I'll talk about this in a minute, and the continuation of pro-democracy narratives. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with satire trying to encourage pro-democracy narratives, but I'm saying that this is obviously a very mainstream thing that satire is doing. So consuming rebellion. So satire as a product. I did a lot of this theory comes out of people like Heath and Porter's whole rebel cell, that kind of work, where we talk about capitalism being able to absorb and then producing counterculture to be consumed. There's this add-on at the moment, you may have seen it, the Snackerkist. I only saw it about a few weeks ago, where it's the basic idea behind it is that this kid is an anarchist with the way that he snacks. He's a really rebel in the kind of snacks that he consumes. He's, not the regular kind of snacker. Now, this is obviously tongue-in-cheek, but there is a lot of kind of products that are sold to us in this way that we're rebelling against capitalism. We're buying artisan breads, we're buying, free range, we're being ethical, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's great that there are ethical options out there if we don't want to consume certain other kind of things, but we also need to acknowledge that this is anti-capitalism being absorbed by capitalism and sold back to us. Fair trade is a great example as well. We're kind of saying, well, we don't want to exploit third world workers, so we're going to consume fair trade products that are a lot more expensive. There's been some great research out of SOS that shows that fair trade is extremely problematic for the people it's meant to be helping, but I'm not going to go into that here. But I would ask that, is it anti-capitalism just sold back to us as a product? Or is it actually a positive emergent practice? Maybe it's both. But when it comes to satire, I'm saying that satire has now been, maybe it's always been a product, but it's rebellion and critique to be consumed. Now, this is a picture of me. This used to be my Facebook profile when I was doing my PhD. So, The Bugle is The Bugle is a podcast that I really, really love. Left wing, hosted by John Oliver, who many of you would know, and Andy Zaltzman, another British satirist. You can see I bought the mug. I have the bag. This is the second bag, by the way, that I bought. The first one broke. I bought another one. In this way, I'm kind of consuming satire to project an image. I'm left-wing, I'm politically aware, I love satire. So, and this is becoming more and more often, you go into, someone will have a poster of a satirist, someone will have a magazine that they've bought. This can be from little things like The Bugle to big things like The Daily Show. So the consumption of satire has become like a symbol of political action and identity creation. Now, whether or not, the big question that a lot of satirists talk about when they talk about counterculture is this actually political action? So again, Heath and Porter, the problem of countercultural movements is often that it gives the appearance of rebellion. So am I actually engaging in the political process when I put a Bugle mug on my head? Or more importantly, when I buy a Bugle mug? There's this great quote where they say, countercultural rebellion is a pseudo-rebellion, a set of dramatic gestures that are devoid of any progressive political or economic consequences and that detract from the urgent task of building a more just society. So I say, one who might consume satire might think they're being radical enough, they're being critical enough that they don't actually have to engage in direct political action, and that can be whether it's voting or actually engaging in unions or anything like that. Now, a lot of the stuff with Heath and Porter, they have very prescribed ways of what political action is, but I think this is an important question to ask. But in their research, they say, well, co-option isn't possible because counterculture is produced by the dominant. It is produced by and indeed is consumerism. And this is where I kind of deviate a little bit, especially when it comes to satire. First of all, yes, I acknowledge that satire is not a pure form of subversion that is truly radical or would be truly radical if it wasn't for the intrusion of politicians, journalists, and capital, especially capital. But I also don't think that we can say that it's so part of the system now that it's co-opted. And there are multiple reasons for this, many of which I have written down. First of all, what I would say is that if we say it's being co-opted, we're kind of ignoring the fact that satire presents itself as an image as being something that's very authentic, very political, very and so it's that image, I'm saying that it's that image that's perhaps being co-opted or perhaps being used in a way that may be counter to the thing that we expect from it. If we say that something can't be co-opted, if it's already part of the system, which is the argument that Heath and Porter give about counterculture, if it's already part of the system, then there's nothing that we can expect from it. And the point is that audiences do expect critique from satire. And so what I'm basically arguing is that we need to address what we want from satire. This will involve a more critical approach that acknowledges, satire's possibility for critique, because I definitely think there's a possibility for critique, but also the fact that it can either be, it can already be an incorporated part of the dominant, or it's being co-opted by politicians. I haven't read any of my notes there, and I promise you I'm able to argue it better when I'm writing, but I hope that's given you a bit of an idea of the theory that I've been working on, the satire, the survey that a lot of this comes out of. That's basically it. If you would like to see any of the publications that I've either previously written in my PhD, you can go here. I will hopefully have these out, hopefully published soon. They'll be going up there. You can get me on those email addresses. If we have time, we can talk about Twitter. If not, just thank you very much.
Okay, we've got time for questions, discussion, or if you want to hear about Twitter, then obviously we can hear about Twitter. Anybody got an immediate dying question to ask? Is that Meredith has? Yeah.
Thanks for a great talk. I really loved that, Rebecca. I noticed that the three politicians you chose are all left-wing.
Yeah.
And just from my own observations, it seems that many more left-wing politicians do participate actively in satire than right-wing ones. So could you say that satire won't be fully co-opted, if you like, by the system until right-wing politicians start using it?
Potentially, though there are definitely politicians that, Boris Johnson is a fine example of a politician that is right-wing and uses comedy and satire to really soften his ambition, to soften his, his right-wing kind of opinions, policies and so on. And even to mask the fact that he's a political person, right down to the way he moves, the way that he moves his hair, the way that he dresses. Having seen him live at Brunel, like the way that he presents himself is this kind of comedic bumbling, like, I'm not going to address that, I'm not going to answer directly what I think about that particular issue. I might make some grand statement like, I think, this country was built on immigration. And, of course, we shouldn't be saying these terrible things. However, and so I do think that it's definitely right-wingers are definitely getting involved. But yeah, you're right. The survey itself does focus on the more left wing.
And Johnson used to be a journalist.
Sorry?
Boris Johnson used to be a journalist.
Indeed, yeah. And the thing when he went from being journalist to politician, there was a period when he was on Have I Got News for You, where he was journalist and then he became the politician. And a lot of people, like in his biography, I've read 2 of his biographies. A lot of journalists, a lot of people talk about the fact that they think that Have I Got News for You really helped him kind of appeal to the electorate, soften a lot of stuff that he had done as a journalist that was extremely aggressive, and present himself, he would fumble his lines, he wouldn't read correctly off the auto cue, so I think that helped him a lot.
Sarah Palin went to SNL, Donald Trump went to SNL as well, so those are other examples.
That's actually the thing, especially when McCain went on there, that was he came across really badly. He was extremely awkward. And the satirists, like Tina Fey had complete control in that situation. Obviously it doesn't always work. I don't know. This is why I think there needs to be so much more research in this area, however you feel about it, because a lot of people, I think, have strong opinions. I went to a conference once and I basically said, I think satire should be doing this. Bad thing to do. I don't want to say that satire should be one thing or the other. I'm not saying we should change how, like, satire must do this, satire must do that. But I think we do need to ask how satire is functioning and how versus what we expect, or what audiences, voters, how people expect, or how they think they're using it. Yeah.
2 comments. There's no your body of people that you interviewed. There were no conservatives or right-wing people. And
Oh no, there were. It was very small though. The participants there was 6.9. It was very small. Yeah.
okay.
6.9%.
Okay.
Yeah. No, please. Sorry. No, please go on.
That's okay. I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
But no, that's an absolute. I don't know what. I'm so sorry I interrupted you. But you're right. I would love to have seen when I looked at the responses to the politicians people who were right wing. When it came to Obama, the very few right wing participants actually did feel that he was successful and that he came across well. But I think there needs to be another study that looks at different factors like a person's political persuasion, a person's political knowledge as well. Political knowledge really important.
And level of education as well is
Yeah.
very important.
Absolutely.
I mean, so the people you interviewed were mostly educated.
Yes.
So with somebody who's not educated, my question is, a person who isn't educated, would they understand the nuance of satire and actually get what is supposed to be happening?
Well, that's an excellent question, and that's something I'd like to see further research doing. When I first came here to the UK, I've told this story before, but I spoke to so many people about my research, and the first thing they would always say is, "Oh, Boris Johnson." And the really fascinating response to me was when I would go to the pub and talk to people who identified as being, working class. They really liked Boris Johnson because they felt like he was more real. In the same sentence, I still remember one bloke in particular. He said, "I really hate how politicians just are so removed from us. They're so wealthy. They're so disconnected from anything to do with my life. They've never had to work, all this kind of stuff." And then he said, "I really like Boris Johnson." So do you see, like, I think you're absolutely right. The responses would be so much more interesting if I had a bigger right-wing or conservative and less educated people.
So
Yeah.
is satire elitist always?
It depends how you define the latest.
Well, if the implication is that less educated people wouldn't get it, I just wonder, I don't know anything about the topic, so I don't really like thinking.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that less educated people would not necessarily get the satire. I just think that when you have, especially a large group of people that have doctorates and who are perhaps trained to be more critical, they would not necessarily look at the politician. Like there was one participant who said, "I really hate when politicians do this. I find it so cringeworthy," especially like with Clegg and the reference to Nando's. But what I felt, you could see this participant reflecting on how they felt. But when I can actually give you word for word. They basically said, when I watched Obama, I really liked it, and I felt like he was genuine. And then they said, "I don't know if this is because of my political beliefs. I don't know if this is because of." I think they said mainly political beliefs, but so you could see the participant really reflecting on how they saw the politician. They still said they really liked Obama and how he came across. So I don't necessarily think that less educated people are somehow not going to get the satire. I think I really hate talking. I see what you mean. Like I don't like talking like this, but perhaps they won't reflect as critically as perhaps someone who's done a doctorate in social sciences.
So historically, satire came from the working classes. That's my image, or not?
No, it didn't.
Oh no, it didn't. That's why I wondered.
No
Right.
way.
No.
Okay.
But there have been studies showing that, satire will be more related to a white-collar type of public, while other type of humor will be related to blue-collar type of public. But that it's still debate. It's still a question in debate as well. But
No, please.
Also, perhaps Obama came across better just by fact that the Americans do everything slicker and more polished, and he would know what he's getting into.
Absolutely.
And he'd have his advisors. They would have, he didn't just show up there and
Well, no, and he was obviously scripted.
Exactly.
It was that's what I think was he had complete control, and he's done many performances like that. I think you could do a whole PhD on Obama's performances on satire alone.
He's a performer.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was. Like a lot of people always say, well, Obama's just good at performing anyway. You know, he's a great orator, but I also think it had to do a lot with the fact that it was scripted. It was completely scripted, and Colbert did not intrude once.
Do we know who wrote it?
No, we don't.
Whether it was the satirist team or whether it was Obama's team?
No, but I suspect that there was heavy vetting that would have gone on. Yeah. No, I don't know. That's all I can see. I don't know. I can guess, but I don't know. No.
Now, what is problematic is Obama was in office, and also the presidential office is ambiguous. Because on the one hand he's a politician, and the other hand he's commander-in-chief and goodness knows what. And so it's very difficult to rubbish somebody in that situation. Was it after Clegg had lost an election?
No, and that's something that I haven't obviously mentioned here, but I did talk about in my article. Clegg and McHugh were just a few months out from an election.
Right.
Whereas Obama, I mean, he can't run for office again, so the dynamics are obviously very different. Yeah.
Because the other thing that's missing is there are right-wing satirists, but they don't get into the media. I have in mind somebody who was the great satirist who never got taken up, a man called Noel Picarda. And I've heard him do performances in private places. And he's the best right-wing satirist I've ever heard. But there's no way the BBC would give him a slot. Because at the end of the day, the media is in the hands of the Liberals. That's really the bottom line. But if there is a hegemony, it's a Liberal hegemony. And I know because I worked for the BBC. And I know exactly what it's like.
What about Murdoch?
Yeah, there are different types of media,
I'm talking about broadcasting. And also, as I say, I remember thinking, well, why is it Picarda never got his chance?
Well, I mean, one thing that's interesting, the dynamic of political comedy, the stand-up scene is a lot more right-wing. Extremely.
Sorry?
The stand-up, stand-up comedy tends to be.
It's more right-wing.
Yes.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
You don't think so?
No,
Not at all.
No.
No.
As for example, who?
I'm talking more the kind of the little clubs that you go to. No?
No.
This is great? Okay.
Well, it depends which ones you go to. I mean, the point is that when you've got things spread out with a little bit here and a little bit there, but once it gets central, as it happens with the broadcasting, do you follow me? Then at that point, there's a valve, there's a selection mechanism, and so you don't get the same variety. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I pick up with the discussion points that you left with that you brought up at the end about how to think about this as resistance or critique, and whether or not it's being commodified or kind of a recuperation of resistance within the dominant form.
Yeah.
Which I quite like. I guess that's something, and I think I'm very much in agreement with how you came out of that. I think that's something that might happen to some degree within the quote-unquote system. But I think you can always, I think the idea is that satire, there's good and bad satire, right? And satirists often compete with each other. And once a satirist becomes popular, like John Oliver, hasn't happened to him yet, we're still saying, oh yes, he's wonderful, but it has happened to Ricky Gervais, like their star can fall a little bit, and a new form of kind of satirist will come along to critique. And I think probably what's more interesting about what's going on here is the problematic of the state form of politics, about whether or not that is actually where the interesting resistance is to be had in terms of satire, because it just keeps getting rewoven into the dominant form. I don't know if you know.
Did you say state politics?
The state form of politics.
Oh, yeah.
So you might, for instance, like Yes Men, you might satirise the WTO or corporations or so forth.
So you mean like not so much politics, well, not politicians, but politics more generally?
Yeah. And then what's interesting about that is how these things are distributed through Twitter and social media. And actually, it's kind of a language of political thought now, as opposed to a straight, here's politics, let's satirise it. It's kind of, this is how we think about these issues. So in that sense, the politicians are not stupid. It's an interesting way to talk and think about the political, because people don't buy the other shtick that they have.
Well, yeah. And I think a lot of people feel that humour is authentic. That humour is telling it how it is. I don't necessarily agree that that's the case, but it often has that appearance, especially in Australia, where if you're able to take a joke, you know, you're more relatable, you're more like us, kind of thing. So I think humour itself, not just satire, but humour itself has currency in that way. There's a bit of a dichotomy between saying, oh well, it's just a joke, you know, we're not going to take it seriously, but also at the same time having that kind of authenticity, you know, it tells the truth, kind of thing. Yeah.
And that's probably what I love. One of the things that I love the most about your presentation, it's all the discourse that reminded me so much of, what's his name again? Jan Brody, who wrote in the Humor Studies Encyclopedia when it comes to stand-up comedy. And one of the characteristics that he will bring up to is that feeling of a very close relationship with the comedian, the feeling of confidence, the trust that you build with the audience. The feeling that this is a very, it's just between you and me. And it's exactly what came out of the different comments that you got. And I just find it so extremely, I think that the whole discourse about humor and comedy and the dialogue that goes with comedy in general, you just brought it a little bit higher. Actually, you have to use that. That's for sure. I just find it so great. And if you don't mind, I will use those quotes in class at the National Comedy School when it comes to
go for it.
comedy on television, because just to remind those future comedians that the conversation doesn't stop on the stage. I mean, it goes on TV, and you still have to build that close relationship, even if the people are not right in front of you.
Yeah,
so great.
It's funny, like our response to, because I know that personally, when I saw that Obama clip, like I've already said, obviously, I'm a left-winger that likes to associate with certain types of comedy. I felt really uncomfortable watching Obama do that. You know, like I felt let down by Colbert. You know, I felt like he shouldn't have done that. And I know that's very personal, but those were the kind of, some of those attitudes kind of came out, you know, like, and it would be great to do more research asking, when you actually have investment in a satire, if you have investment in a comedian, what happens when they maybe betray the trust, or they perform in a way that is different to how they're respected, you know? And what it was thinking, like, if a politician tries to cross over, if a comedian tries to cross over into politics, how were they then perceived? How would we perceive Jon Stewart if he became senator?
And that happened a few times in history.
Yeah.
Really. Comedians that were, like, in France, it happened a few times.
Yeah, and I think Al Franken.
What do you mean, de Gaulle?
No, what's his name again? He used to present himself as a clown.
Yes, de Gaulle.
Not de Gaulle, no, I'm sorry.
Marceau.
What's his name?
Not Marceau.
No, not so. I used to wear like a yellow jumper. I'll find the name later on, I'll Google it. But he lost his election. It happened in Quebec a few years ago. To a comedian just went as an independent, saying, well, if you are to vote for Buffon, just vote for me. So that was his main argument.
Hi, really good talk, thank you. I don't have any background on the topic area, but purely from the design of the survey, I thought it was interesting the way you did it, but if you really want to look at the impact of satire, don't you think it would have been better, or you would have got a bit more if you had done a before and after? Because the role of bias is not something that's being explored as much over here. Because it might be that they already thought Obama was great. So what happens as a role of the satire, like, you know, so it's those things.
Yeah. I mean, it was an online survey.
Right.
So I completely agree with you, and I hate that I keep saying it was a preliminary survey because I know that's a tiny bit of a cop out. But that's kind of what it was. I think that's a really good point. But even then, would we be able to see if there are so many factors that come into it? Would we be able to see if their mind changed after they?
Yeah, the validity of it as well. Does it change if we were to go back to them, say, after a month?
Yeah. And I mean, there are so many other factors to consider. Like I chose the videos mainly on format, but also, like Christy mentioned, like Obama he's not running for election again. This is pushing a policy that is already in place. Clegg and McHugh were months out from an election. That both were looking like they were going to lose. You know, so.
They had nothing more to lose.
Well, that's what some of the participants said, that Clegg especially, massive damage control. If going on the program, there's no way he could have done worse than what, and one participant said, than what he was going to do and did eventually do, so.
They were going to rename the program The Last of Click, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting, the program has now got a different buzzer. They've now got a buzzer that's like, that's true actually. And so they have, like, when they think something's untrue, bullshit buzzer. When they think something's true, that's true actually. Yeah, different types of things, yeah.
And how did that switch occur? Because I think it's more true in the States, where they have so many fantastic comedians doing satire, that we now listen to the comedians and laugh at the politicians. So, I mean, how did that happen?
How did that happen? That's a big question.
Yeah.
I think we could all debate that. I mean, one thing, I think there are so many factors that could influence that. I think some of it is, again, we think humour is telling it how it is, maybe. Humour might have some cultural capital. Maybe the politicians have just got so outrageous that, I mean, we could talk about this for hours. Obviously, the example I've got on the screen is just a silly meme. Trump and then John Oliver. John Oliver's doing such interesting things, talking for 20 minutes, satirising one topic. So it's quite an interesting way to do satire, very different to what's been done in the past. So I think the memes really playing on that kind of dichotomy. But yeah, it's a good question.
I think it'd be kind of interesting to see how a survey would run with satirists who are doing stuff which you might say is dangerous or upsetting. So stuff like the glass eye episode on Peter Dennon or something around that, or Cake.
Yes.
It was quite a good one because that interacted with
politicians. Well, that's in Hansard, you know, because it was mentioned.
Yeah.
We need to do something about cake in Parliament.
About whether or not people see that as authentic or dangerous or upsetting. Because I think there's an issue here about whether or not satire is actually just complicit with the state and the politics. Someone like Swift was considered very dangerous and upsetting at the time, but is now like this totem. We go back every issue related to comment, but it's not as good as Swift. So it's kind of been recuperated all the way through. So Have I Got News for You, Private Eye, they're kind of bastions of Britishness almost.
Yes, and actually there was one participant who made a comment about satire has become a managed product, not like it used to be. I think there is a lot of this within politics and satire itself, you know, it's not as good as it used to be.
Everywhere.
Sorry?
I said it's everywhere.
Yeah, it is. There's nostalgia for anything. I do think that satire has definitely become, perhaps it was always complicit, but it has definitely become a industry and something that politicians will now engage with. Like there's Chaser in Australia, for instance. I did a paper where I looked at the decade-long history of how people would respond to the Chaser. So when they started in 2001, people were shocked. Politicians were really affronted, offended. They would respond very seriously. There's no way that happens now. People recognise the Chaser, and they also recognise that they're, to some extent, either taken seriously or respected, and so they have to respond in a particular way. even if what they're saying is utterly outrageous. So, yeah. Anyone else?
I have the name of the French politician, if I French. It's Coluche in the 1981 presidential election, if ever you're looking at it.
Okay, is there any other questions or observations? Okay, we do have wine and drinks, so maybe I'm sure Rebecca would be happy to continue discussion over drinks.
If anyone's curious in the publications, especially if you want to talk about Twitter, please come and chat to me. They're obviously not, they haven't, 2 of them are going through peer review, one of them is going to be submitted tomorrow, so they're not published versions, but if you're interested in seeing more detail, please do come up and have a look. So, thank you very much for your time.